Chapter 28. Body Count. Feeling the wind flow through her hair, Sierra pictured Big Boy carrying her across the ranch when she was very young. Even though Big Boy was a very large horse, he was the gentlest the family owned, and that made him the one always chosen for children to learn to ride. Sorrow filled Sierra as the image faded away, shaken from her thoughts as the Chinese assault vehicle crossed railroad tracks. "Woo-hoo! Damn, this thing will go anywhere!" Carter screamed, happy with the way the vehicle drove. Looking back, Sierra could barely see Katie following on horseback. "Slow it down. The horse can't move as fast." Carter reluctantly eased up on the accelerator that he wanted to smash to the floor so badly. He wanted to make a comment about how much better the vehicle was than a horse, but after what had happened to Big Boy, he asked instead, "So where are we headed?" Sierra knew the question would be asked, and even though there was no set plan, she replied, "Follow the tracks for now." Hearing the short conversation between Carter and Sierra, Blankenship felt the need to express his intentions. "If you are heading away from the Chinese forces, then let me out. Kaylee and I will not be going." Sierra really had no idea if they were heading away from or toward the invading force, but she was always looking for new information. With the back of her left hand, she extended it, striking Carter on the upper arm and signaling for him to stop and turn off the motor. Turning in her seat, she looked back at Blankenship, seated to the left of the machine gun manned by one of the females rescued from execution. "Okay, Blank, here is the deal. We are not running away from this fight, but at this point, we have no plan. We're just driving around the countryside looking for soldiers of the Red Army to put bullets in. You know where any are?" The response wasn't what he had expected, but one that he liked so much, it didn't even register that she had nicknamed him. "We're just outside of Gray Summit, so there are large caves and abandoned railroad tunnels in the area. They should make for great rally points and safe places to rest. I believe we're close to one of the tunnels now." Sierra relished the thought of a secure place to park the vehicle out of sight and rest without keeping watch in all directions for someone sneaking up on them. "Are we moving in the right direction?" she asked, hoping the answer was yes. Blankenship looked around and quickly responded, "I don't know the area that well, but this looks right. A few other things you should be aware of. A militia group calling themselves the Ozark Mountaineers populated the area just east of here, in hopes of keeping the Chinese from moving out of the city." Blankenship paused as the memories of that day flashed through his thoughts, and he fought to push them down deep. Unsure what he was thinking, Sierra did notice his grip tighten on around the rifle in his hands before he continued, "They were mostly killed by artillery, and those who survived began moving west in hopes of connecting with a group calling themselves the United Constitutional Militia. Also, there are those who work for the Chinese gathering up people in cages, but few survive for long." Carter and Sierra looked at each other, shocked to hear him talk about those in the group they had just left. Sierra didn't want to go into detail, but commented briefly, "Yeah, we've heard of them. We ran into a group with a cage full of women. So the Mountaineers moved west? That explains the paratroopers we encountered outside of Union." Sierra went on to explain the events of a few days ago. When Sierra had finished, Blankenship wondered if the troops who parachuted in were new or part of those already in St. Louis. Either way, it didn't matter to him, for one just meant there were more to kill, and the other meant he was closer to killing the last one. Both thoughts gave him a warm feeling. "Sierra, you hearing that?" Katie asked, turning her head side to side in order to determine what direction the sound was coming from. Sierra did hear the sound of humming, but had been too caught up in conversation to take notice. She could hear it getting louder, but could not tell where it was coming from because of sitting in a large valley. Suddenly, the humming drastically increased in volume as a motorcycle with 2 Chinese soldiers flew through the air in front of them. The humming noise the motorcycle made was drawn out by the rider firing a pistol in their direction. As he fired, Sierra felt a warm wetness come from above as she grabbed hold of the machine gun mounted in front of her and took aim. She knew what the warm substance was all too well and chose to focus on the target, but it had happened so fast that no sooner did she place her hands on the gun Then the motorcycle had vanished into the woods. Carter fired up the vehicle to give chase. Turning around, Sierra looked back to address the gunner behind her, only to see the gun pointing to the sky. Sierra watched as Blankenship and Timmy moved the woman's body off to one side before Timmy stood up to take control of the weapon. Just as he settled in place, Sierra heard the motorcycle once again, only this time it was behind them. Knowing what to listen for even with the sound of their vehicle running, Katie sat motionless on top of her horse with her eyes closed. Across her chest was the rifle she loved using most in three-gun matches, a Ranger-proof carbine. With the rifle held firmly in her hands, she tracked the motorcycle through the woods by its sound, ready for it to appear once again. Hearing the motorcycle increase in acceleration, Katie felt it was time and knew just where it was going to appear. Her head bobbed up and down slightly as she counted 1, 2, 3, without saying a word, and then she sprang into action. Katie arched her back as she fell backward with ease, bringing the Ranger-proof rifle up just inches from her chest, and fired rapidly, causing the semi-automatic rifle to sound as if it was full auto. The first few rounds passed by without making contact with the riders, but their luck ran out when it came to the three that followed. Katie watched as the two soldiers fell from the motorcycle as it struck the ground and crashed into a tree. "What the hell, no explosion? That shit always explodes in the movies!" Katie shouted disappointedly as she sat up in the saddle. Sierra couldn't help but be impressed, but she knew there wasn't any time to stick around. Gesturing to Carter to get the vehicle moving, Sierra spotted two more motorcycles heading toward them from about 100 yards up the track. How stupid, Sierra thought, as she gripped the machine gun in front of her and prepared to fire. "I got him!" As she was taking aim, Sierra watched as the rider stood up behind the driver and took aim with a pistol. "You're already dead, dumbass." Before she had the trigger fully pressed, Sierra heard a shot fire from above her, and the rider on the motorcycle tumbled to the ground with the driver following a split second later as her bullet struck. The same scenario occurred with the second motorcycle. Sierra looked up over her left shoulder to where Blankenship had used the roll bars to brace his rifle. "I said I had it, Blank," Sierra repeated. With a calm voice, Blankenship looked down at Sierra and said, "And I said I am here to kill them, not watch others do it." Sierra smiled and then slapped Carter on the arm to get moving. "Hold it," Blankenship ordered. Carter stopped the vehicle and looked over to Sierra for approval. He felt the fact that she didn't react to him was his approval. "We need the gear these guys have, and if you didn't shoot the shit out of those bikes, we can use them," Blankenship urgently explained. Feeling as if she should be upset by the comment, Sierra merely thought about how much fun it was pulling the trigger on the bullet eater before responding. "Somebody get the guys in the woods and then meet me up there." Sierra exited the vehicle, pulled her pistol from its holster, and began walking to the two motorcycles on the track in front of them. After gathering all the useful gear from the dead soldiers and burying their fallen machine gunner, they only knew as April, the six of them prepared to move. Katie watched as Sierra and Blankenship strapped their personal gear onto the scratched-up motorcycles. She could not help from feeling a little left out since everyone was now on something much faster than the horse she was on, and she knew they would all be waiting on her as she rode along. That was something she could not handle, and as Sierra neared, she presented her solution. "Sierra, since you now have the bikes, why don't you two go find the tunnel we are going to use? That way you can make sure it's all clear, and if not, you can get away without waiting on me and the horse. Carter and I will stick with the tracks here and just hope that it isn't much farther, but at least we will know. What do you think?" Sierra and Blankenship looked at each other and agreed, having just discussed that same strategy when they were picking up the bikes from where they had crashed. "There isn't much track left to follow, so try not to get lost. If you do lose sight of where the tracks were, then stop, and we'll find you. Okay?" Sierra watched for a response from each of the four, and then slung her leg over the motorcycle. "If we don't find anything in 5 miles, we will head back to you," Blankenship added before firing up his motorcycle. It had been some time since Robert had taught her how to ride, but Sierra had no problem remembering. The motorcycle was nearly the same size, but had a great deal more power. That, however, was something she really liked. Following the old railway system provided many different obstacles to brush their skills up, and that was something both of them needed. Much of the track was still in place, while other sections were nothing but a tangled mess where it had been removed or buried by years of neglect. Sierra looked down at the numbers on the odometer and could not understand how they had almost reached the 5-mile mark they agreed upon. She looked ahead, seeing nothing but trees, and hoped the tunnel would soon appear. After over a week of being on the move, Sierra felt a base of operation was something they truly needed, having ventured into something more massive than it had been. She had learned from history that a smaller force could defeat a larger force by hitting it and running, otherwise known as guerrilla warfare. That was what she had in mind, to not necessarily defeat them, but hurt them badly while using their own equipment. Pressing down on the brake pedal, Sierra sat facing nothing but woods as the track seemed to just end. Coming to a stop alongside her, Blankenship scrutinized the terrain that lay before them. Could we have gone the wrong way? Some of this track isn't even here anymore, and we have reached the 5-mile mark to turn around, Sierra asked, looking back the way they had come. Blankenship believed they were on the right path and was determined to figure it out. We have only gone 3. The gauge is in kilometers. Look at the way those trees are leaning. Blankenship put down the kickstand of his bike and started walking forward with his hands slightly out to his sides. Seeing what Blankenship was doing, Sierra followed, doing the same thing, only keeping her right hand a little closer to the pistol on her side. Hey, Blank, you gonna let me in on what you got going on? Instead of answering her question, Blankenship called out, Fellow travelers approaching. Sierra was starting to make out what he had been talking about with the angles of the trees. They were all standing like they had been planted crooked while fully grown, and the more she stared at them, the stranger they looked. What business do you have here? A voice filled the valley from high above the ridge. Refuge! Blankenship hollered back. From between the trees at ground level, 4 men walked out into the open. Only one carried a pistol, and the other 3 were armed with what looked like hand-carved clubs. None of the 4 looked to have been around civilization much in the last few years, and Sierra began to wonder if they even knew about the invasion taking place. I would ask that you hand over the weapons, but that doesn't look like something you would be willing to do. So, setting that aside, how about you tell us where you got those bikes from? The man with the pistol seemed to be the one who spoke for the others. To Sierra's surprise, he didn't sound like the hillbilly she was expecting, though he was dressed for the part. We killed the bastards who were on them. So we good? Sierra replied, already tired of wasting time. Her response sent the 4 men into a laughing frenzy as they began waving for them to follow. They made their way back through the trees. Hesitantly, Blankenship stepped forward, but picked up his pace once he saw Sierra walking fast for the same spot they entered. As they approached the trees, it became clear by the ropes holding them upright as to why they looked odd. Stepping between the trees, Sierra's eyes took a moment to adjust to the darkness, but once they had, she knew instantly this was going to be their new base of operation. Candles burned all along the tunnel that seemed to have no end. I have lived here for many years, and never have there been so many people as of late. By the way, you can call me Bottle. Bottle walked over to a small group of people who had gathered around. Even in the darkness, Sierra could tell they needed food and soap. Though it had been days since she had bathed, she was not going to cast that stone. Well, Bottle, that would most likely be due to the Chinese military destroying and invading St. Louis and people running for their lives, Sierra said, not just to be sarcastic, but to find out just what information they possessed. You are not wrong. A few of us lived in here as outcasts of society, but now we have become the blessed. It is amazing what people realize they no longer need when they must carry it with them, or how little they know about survival. Those city people still try to give us money for what food we have, like it is worth anything. Hell, I remember years ago when I had a place in the city, and people would say, if anything happens, I'll just go out to the country and shoot me a deer. Well, They didn't factor in the other million who had that same idea. Bottle broke out in uncontrollable laughter while trying to say, They done ate it all now. Sierra thought this group might be a bullet short of a full load, but they knew what they were doing with camouflage. Here's the deal, fellas. We need this place for security from the enemy soldiers, and in return, we can help with supplies. How does that sound? Bottle turned back to the 4 men who had been outside with him and discussed the offer. After a minute, the discussion was over, and Bottle made his counteroffer. When you say supplies, you mean food and stuff, correct? Yes, Sierra replied. The area over there is ours and cannot be used for anything else. Clear? Yes, Sierra again replied. One last thing. Bottle paused and looked to those around him before continuing. As each of them focused on Sierra and Blankenship, he made their final request. We want a kiss or no deal. Sierra heard Blankenship snicker from where he stood beside her. Slightly turning her head, she whispered, What makes you think they want it from me?